Welcome everyone, Christine here on Serious Gaming with my review of The Witcher by Netflix, episodes 1 to 4. This has been a series that, one, I've anticipated, two, I've been concerned about. Concerned because the person in charge of it, Lauren Schmidt, decided that what's really important when you're adapting a very popular series of books from Poland, popular in Poland that is, from one of the most, and also a series of books related to a very popular gaming series, with The Witcher 3 being one of the most awarded game ever developed. The thing that really does matter to you as a series producer is racial diversity. Piss off. Like, that's been my reaction to all of that racial controversy. It's like, piss the fuck off. If this is what's important to you, if you're creating a series and this is what fucking matters to you, I think your priorities are completely fucking wrong on so many levels. And obviously that has created a pretty bad mood for a lot of fans of The Witcher, like myself, that don't give a crap about your racial diversity quota and your obsession with something like that. Give us a bloody good series. We don't give a shit about the rest. But hey, this is how the TV industry works. This is how the film industry works. And it was really telling when Henry Cavill was being interviewed that he was being asked, "Oh, you have a toxic fan base," and it's like, no, we don't. We have people that are very passionate about something. And one of the good things, compared to the idiotic push by the director for this racial diversity crap, compared to that, it was such a breath of fresh air to see Henry Cavill talk about Geralt, talk about nailing the character, talk about, being a gamer, understanding games, understanding things that much of the media doesn't give a shit about. Like, here is a guy that's really in tune with the people that actually care about the series, the worldwide audience, which is made up, a significant number of them are actually gamers, because The Witcher has become popularized thanks to the video games. And here's a guy who is very much like that as well. He's read the books, he's played the games, he knows what it's at, and he has wanted to do it justice. Has he succeeded is the question. Well, let's start with episode 1. And really, episode 1, for all the misgivings I might have about the series creator, her decisions, for all that, I'd say that they did a fairly solid job. I wouldn't say a perfect job, but a fairly solid job with episode 1, which could very well be split into 2 episodes, because you have 2 separate storylines happening at the same time in parallel. So you could just basically split the episode in 2 and focus on the one of the 2 different storylines. So the first one is focused on Geralt of Rivia and the short story, The Lesser Evil. In the games, in Witcher 1, 2, and 3, he often gets called the Butcher of Blaviken. Well, this story, which is based on a short story that Sapkowski wrote, is something that explains how he got that name, how he became the Butcher of Blaviken. It's actually a fairly important story that really is revealing about who Geralt is, how his life is, what he deals with, all that. And overall, it's a fairly solid adaptation of that particular short story. Yes, there are details that you could say, oh, this is not perfectly accurate. But here's my perspective on that. It doesn't necessarily matter for something to be perfectly accurate. It doesn't matter for something to be translated exactly from the books to a show or from the books in a TV. What matters is, did you capture the essence of a story, the themes, the morals, the dilemmas, the issues that are being dealt in that story. And this is something that I feel they did very well in translating the Lesser Evil story onto Netflix. Because the Lesser Evil is where a lot of people talk, thanks to the gaming media, which doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about. A lot of people say, oh, Geralt chooses the lesser evil. No, precisely not. Geralt doesn't choose the lesser evil. In fact, in this story, you could say he chooses the greater evil in perhaps one of the decisions he makes. Or that's open to interpretation. But The point is, evil is evil. That's the way Geralt puts it, and I'm glad that they actually do have that line of dialogue in all of it. It's a story about the sorcerer that's being hunted by this bandit leader, Renfri. Now, she's hunting him because he ruined her life when she was a young girl, a princess, because she was born with the curse of the Black Sun, which is actually a fairly important thing in the books. Not just in this particular short story, but important overall, like these girls that were born under the Black Sun, that were cursed, etc. He tried to kill her, it failed, and now she wants revenge after he ruined her life. And Geralt gets stuck in all of this, in the town of Blaviken. And ultimately, Geralt, in both the show and the books, decides that although Renfri might have a reason behind wanting revenge, he decides to butcher her and her men. That's what ultimately ends up happening. Do I feel they missed kind of key point as to why Geralt did it in the books? When they translated the show, they missed something, that Renfri wasn't just going to kill the sorcerer. She was going to butcher the town. She and her men were going to butcher the people of the town, and that's ultimately one of the big reasons why Geralt intervened there. And that's missing. That's not really made explicit, so to speak, here in the show, and I feel that's a bit of a disappointment. But look, an issue like that notwithstanding, I'd say the acting was great. Henry Cavill did a fairly great job as Geralt. The actor and the actress for Renfri also did. Emma Appleton, that is, she did a fairly superb job portraying Renfri, and you could feel the emotional impact of this particular story, and it really did explain who Geralt is, what are his struggles, what's he dealing with, and that's the importance of the short story. It's really about introducing Geralt of Rivia as a character to the audiences, and it's a pretty solid bang-up job. You know, some people are going to have complaints, some people are going to disagree with it, but did Geralt feel to me as Geralt? Yes, he did. You know, as someone who's played all the games, who's read a reasonable amount of the books, did he feel like Geralt? Yes, he did. Did it capture the essence of the lesser evil story? Yes, it did. And that's a fairly superb job. Then we have Cintra, the other part of this episode. The episode itself is called The End's Beginning. They should have just called it The Lesser Evil, I feel. It would have been a more appropriate term, but it's not just about the Lesser Evil storyline. I feel it would have been better had they just focused on the Lesser Evil storyline and all of that, because then you have the situation in Cintra. Now, if you're watching this, you might wonder, are these things happening at the same time, or are the timelines different? Based on a quote from Renfri, you might think that the events in Cintra are happening much later, but we don't really know. It would actually make sense that it would happen much later. Also, one thing before I move on to the Cintra storyline, a very important quote about Geralt, why he's quiet, bitter, etc., disillusioned with humanity, is that he recounts to Roach, he recounts the first monster, quote unquote, that he killed, who was actually a man trying to rape a girl, the daughter of a merchant. And Geralt thought, oh, I'd be a big hero, the girl would take a liking to me, would be appreciative, the merchant would pay me, all that. That didn't end up happening. He killed the bandits, not just one, bandits, there were a group of them, if I remember from the books correctly. Killed the bandits, saved the girl. She was terrified, not at all appreciative. The merchant ran for the hills, and Geralt was left to deal with it. And ever since then, he's been very disillusioned. So Geralt had a good sense of naivety or idealism when he set off from Kaer Morhen, and that was quickly shattered. And I like the fact that they did actually take the time when everything else is happening to actually have him say that, have him tell that particular story. I don't quite remember, I've forgotten quite a lot of details of the books. I don't quite remember where he said this in the books. I believe I don't think it was in The Lesser Evil. I think it was another short story where he was explaining why he is what he is. Or maybe even the main saga. I really don't remember. It's been quite a while since I've dived into the books. But anyway, a very good thing that they explain that, because it's also fairly revealing about Geralt as a person. So anyway, on to the events of Cintra, and this is taking place at the start of the first Nilfgaardian War. There are 2 Nilfgaardian Wars in the novels, and this is based on the novels. There are 3, if you count the games, if you count The Witcher 3. I think they shouldn't, for the record. Even if that was an option, I think they shouldn't, because there's a big bloody mess with the whole storyline of the games, but that's a separate discussion. But anyway, this is in the opening salvo of the first Nilfgaardian War, or the Great War. Now, Nilfgaard doesn't think it's 2 separate wars. For them, it's the same war, the Northern Wars, they call them. So it's basically the same conflict, just prolonged. For the Northerners, it's the first and the second war. So you have the fall of Cintra, the opening salvo of the first Nilfgaardian War. And you have Queen Calanth riding out and being defeated by the Nilfgaardians. You have an introduction to her, and she's gonna, based on the trailers, just keep in mind I'm recording this after just watching that first episode, at least this portion. She's gonna play a role in other episodes, of course, but I feel it's a good decision. A bit confusing, I guess, for some people because of the way they're gonna handle it, but I feel it's a good decision to introduce her like this, to introduce Ciri like this, and it does give us a certain understanding. I felt it was a bit stretched that they were trying to make a connection between the Geralt storyline and Blaviken and the Cintra storyline. Like, Geralt gets mentioned to Ciri, Ciri gets mentioned to Geralt, and so on. And I feel that was for, like, the connection was very, very sketchy, or more or less non-existent, and fairly forced if there was anything really bad about this. But overall, the Cintra storyline, nothing spectacular, I'd say. It just introduces some characters, gives us an appraisal of the situation, and shows us the fall of Cintra, which is... It does happen in books, but it's not really explored. So this is the first time in the Witcher series, regardless, games, novels, and this show, this is the first time that the fall of Cintra actually gets properly explored in a sense. Though, like with many TV shows, the battle is shit. Because, hey, what's about this? Tactics, formations, proper military strategy. And before anyone suggests, oh, you can't have that really in a TV show, Vikings did this considerably better. I mean, don't get me wrong, Vikings has a lot of problems, but in terms of actually making it feel as a proper battle, Vikings had a lot of proper battles, right? With proper formations, proper handling. This is just a spectacle. It's like, oh, the Cintrians charge on their cavalry into the Nilfgaardian ranks with the infantry coming in behind them. Not really the wisest idea. They do that. They get overwhelmed by the sheer number of Nilfgaardians, then the Nilfgaardians take the city of Cintra, and this is really showing the fall of Cintra. Overall, I'd say the battle was nothing special, just was pretty bad TV spectacle. The big discussion has been the ballsack armor of the Nilfgaardians. Honestly, it just looks bad. I mean, it's so jarring because you do have a lot of good costumes, a lot of good creative thinking, and very solid armor for the Cintrians here. And then you have the horrible armor on the Nilfgaardians. And no, the series producer saying, oh, we want to show Nilfgaard that's an army of conscripts. No, Nilfgaard is the most powerful and wealthy and fucking empire in the world. They're not just an army of conscripts. Of course, you do have the issue, it's like, well, how can we make Nilfgaard without, dealing with the copyright of the games, right? There is that particular issue. But the armor that they've made for Nilfgaard is absolutely fucking terrible. Thankfully, there's not so much of a focus on that, but it is just a fairly... it's just fairly jarring to see, even while little there is to see it of it. Not much focus, but still an annoyance to deal with. Respect to that. I felt Queen Calanth was fairly solidly played. Mousesack, who's Ermion in The Witcher 3, again, solid. Ciri, as well as basically the Cintrians, because you really don't see the Nilfgaardians, except, just as an opposing force. The whole focus is on the Cintrians, and I felt that it was handled fairly well. I felt the performances of the actors was handled quite well. I felt that every single one of them did did quite well in their roles. We'll see what happens with Ciri, because obviously she's going to be one of the main characters, but for now, Freya Allen, who's playing Ciri, pretty solid, decent job. So that was episode 1. As for episode 2, the 4 marks, which might as well be called the Yennefer episode. And the 4 marks title is a reference to the 4 marks that Tissaia de Vries, Yennefer's tutor, paid for her from a peasant, because Yennefer was born as a hunchback and was treated fairly badly as a result of it by her family. And although the episode does show Ciri, does show Geralt, introduces Dandelion, the real focus of this particular episode is on Yennefer and her trials at the Mage Academy, so to speak. But this is no Hogwarts, suffice to say. Tissaia de Vries, well, let's just say we can understand perfectly well how Philippa Eilhart, Sabrina Glivasic, Yennefer herself became such contemptible characters without any regard for anyone else, if this is the person that taught them. And I guess Tissaia, the actress, really did a bang-up job on portraying her, and the schemes, the manipulations. There's just hints of that, of the schemes and manipulations that go on between mages, and just how, well, completely bloody, ruthless mages are. And that's all shown here through the trials that Yennefer goes from, as she's basically taken from her farm after displaying an ability to do magic, taken from her farm for 4 marks, and thrown into the academy. And there is no escape. Once you get there, you are not getting out of there unless you become mage, or, in this case, if you fail, and this is where it gets pretty brutal, you get turned into an eel by Tissaia, and then thrown into a pond to live out the rest of your life, I guess, because you are a source of chaos. They keep using this term, chaos. Magic is... magic apparently is different than this chaos. You could use the source, the explanation I've seen a lot of games, right, is the source of magic and all that. Here they go with the explanation of chaos, and that all of them can be conduits of chaos, but that they need to learn to control, and some can, some can't, and those that fail, well, there's a pretty harsh ending for those that can't. That is fairly brutal, but it does explore Yennefer. What's interesting is that for much of the episode, I was under the impression, are they really going to portray Yennefer in a completely positive manner as the victim when she is so horrible as a person herself? No, actually, they're not going to do that. Thankfully, they're not going to do that. They're going to show, oh yes, she lets her emotions control her actions. She goes into blind fury, and that's actually a problem with her being able to study. And then she learns to control her emotions, but in a fairly bad fashion. So who knows how Yennefer is going to develop as a character, but I'd say they did her character fair amount of justice there with this particular episode. She did have a harsh upbringing. She did have a very harsh tutor, and she is a very bad person as a result of it. And she's also the woman that's destined for Geralt, according to the books. People who play the games would beg to differ, but yes, canonically, Geralt and Yennefer are made for each other. But like in this episode, you don't have anything really of the saga, except I guess the Ciri part, where she's just fleeing from Cintra. She's fleeing on forest, but nothing really happens with her. Just she gets to see the rough life the refugees from Cintra have. The refugee camp then gets destroyed, but nothing too particularly interesting with Ciri. But that's really the only thing that you could say is related to the saga, Ciri's whole her whole journey there, but nothing really happens with her. The whole thing with Yennefer, that's not really in any of the books, obviously, and not really explored in any of the books. The origins, I guess you could say, of the character. I mean, some of these things are mentioned, but not really a story that's been told before. So they really dove in deep to explain, okay, here's where Yennefer came from, her lineage. She's got elven blood, and where she's going and how she became the person that she ultimately is. And then with Geralt and Dandelion, it's another short story. So Geralt so far has been in 2 short stories, 2 important ones. I'd say that The Lesser Evil is one of the most important short stories for The Witcher, but certainly the one that he's involved here is also fairly important because here Dandelion is introduced. And he's just or Jaskier, as you could call it. However, actually, I don't believe that the episode mentioned his name at all, or I certainly didn't catch it there. But anyway, Dandelion, Jaskier, whatever, he's just as much of an annoying cunt as you'd expect it to be. Like a very punchable asshole. It was a bit funny because in the actual short story, he was fleeing from his life from the town because he had gotten a girl pregnant and her brothers wanted to kill him for it. Kind of a big deal, right, to get someone pregnant in the Middle Ages. And he decided, I'm going to join with Geralt of Rivia and we're going to go to the Valley of Flowers, and we go on this little adventure involving a Sylvan and introducing the elves, including Taruviel. Taruviel, who is a character in the first Witcher game. And also has a Gwent card, of course. But really, the story is not particularly interesting, I'd say. It's more of an introduction. Okay, here's the tragedy of the elves. Here's Dandelion. Here's the Valley of Flowers. Here's the history of the elves. And they're very resentful of their current situation. They're very desperate. They're in a very bad situation. Nothing extraordinary. Certainly doesn't have the highs of the Yennefer storyline. And I feel that if they had cut everything but the Yennefer part of it, they still have a pretty solid episode. As it is, they have a solid episode that just kind of drags on in certain portions because the whole thing, might just be my impression as someone who's read this short story, but it's like, oh yeah, here's the Sylvan, here's Dandelion, here's Geralt, here's the elves, here's Taruviel, the Elven King, etc. I believe it was a noble, actually, in the short story, not necessarily a king. But either way, here are these elven characters here showing the situation of the elves, the desperation that they're in. And it just felt, I guess, by the numbers with that, and just with Ciri, nothing extraordinary, nothing exceptional there, nothing particularly interesting. Whereas the Yennefer storyline, yes, that was certainly interesting because... well, the mages in the Witcher universe are fairly interesting. So that's really all there is to say about episode 2. It's basically Yennefer's origin story in Dandelion to an extent. It's also basically tracking Ciri's story from point A to point B, as she continues to evade Nilfgaard, who is still after her, and they are showing no mercy so far. I'm curious to see in future episodes how they'll handle Nilfgaard, if Nilfgaard are just going to continue being bloodthirsty conquerors that show no mercy and take no prisoners, or if there's going to be some nuance to them. Hopefully there is some nuance, because if they've just made the Nilfgaardian Nazis, then that's not the way Nilfgaard should be portrayed. Anyway, episode 3. So let's kick it off with Ciri, who barely shows up in this episode and only does so in order to walk into a forest in a fairly creepy manner as she is being lured there by a spell which kind of mind controls her, I think. At least she's ignoring everything else that's happening around her. She doesn't care, and everything that is surrounding her. So very little of Ciri, so this is about Geralt and about Yennefer. And this is where it becomes clear what kind of timelines are. Ciri's timeline is the newest one. It's the most of the most recent events. Geralt's is in the middle between Ciri and Yennefer, and Yennefer has the oldest timeline. So the events that are taking place in Yennefer's timeline are the oldest events. Then there's Geralt. Then there's Ciri. It's not necessarily the best way to tell a story, I feel. But they've done so because because Lauren Smith wanted to show these short stories, some of which are actually quite important. I mean, certainly The Lesser Evil is important, introducing Dandelion. I mean, not really an important short story, I'd say, but it is introducing Dandelion, or Jaskier, whatever, right? I'll just go with Dandelion because that's the name I've used, and that's the name probably a lot of people are used to. I mean, even though even though he's probably called something differently. I mean, I haven't heard his name. He doesn't show up in this episode, but anyway. So yeah, introducing Dandelion / Jaskier. Important character, right? Very important character, not just for the short story, not for the short stories more so, but rather for the saga. So important character in that respect. And then, of course, you have unique content, unique stuff, which is about Yennefer. I wonder if they're gonna have the storyline about the Last Wish in this. You know, while I've watched these 3 episodes, I've been wondering, why are they gonna lead up to that? I guess we'll find out about that. But anyway. The story in this particular episode is about Geralt, and it's actually the Witcher story, the short story, the actual starting point, the point where it all started, the Striga story, the intro cinematic to The Witcher 1, and one of Geralt's most famous acts, for which he will receive absolutely no credit in here. So, if I'm not mistaken, this short story was the very first one that Sapkowski wrote about The Witcher. So he didn't have all the world building that came later, all the characters that came later, and so he created characters that were barely used later on, and didn't use characters that should have existed at this point. And so we get Triss Marigold in the Striga story. The Striga story, to explain it, is in the short stories. Is that King Foltest of Redania had an incestuous relationship with his sister and got her pregnant. They got cursed by someone who also wanted Foltest's sister, Ada, who wanted her hand. This person cursed them, and Foltest's sister died. But because of the curse, the unborn child came to life and became a Striga. Geralt decided to cure her, potentially kill her if necessary by the Temerians, and he does precisely that. It introduces Geralt. This is how the Witcher world is introduced. This is how it's created. It gives you a good idea. Kings are willing to make a lot of people suffer for their own selfish interests, just as Foltest does here. Geralt gets screwed over in order to get paid, suffers quite a bit, but it also introduces the idea that Geralt is not just purely a monster slayer. He's also someone who's willing and capable of saving the monsters if there is a potential to save them. And he's not just an unthinking brute either. So anyway, they introduce Triss in all of this. Now, she's added on top of the characters that make up the cast in the short story. Some changes are made, specifically that in the short story itself, everyone knows, and the Witcher series as a whole, everyone knew that Foltest had been screwing over his own sister and got her pregnant, so that's a known fact. Here it's not a known fact, and it's like a secret, so to speak, that Geralt uncovers, and Geralt has to find a way to lift the curse, and he does so more or less against the will of Foltest until towards the very end of all of it. He convinces Foltest, or Triss convinces, who's his advisor, Triss convinces Foltest that he should trust Geralt. Now, Triss seems to be... Now, Triss did not play a role in the original short story, as I've said, but nor was she the advisor to King Foltest. At least that's what I think, if I remember correctly here. I don't think she was the original advisor to King Foltest. Certainly at this time, that was Keira Metz, though she doesn't show up in the short story either. It seems that they've decided to eliminate the character of Keira Metz and instead put Triss in her place from the very start, and a way to introduce Triss in all of it. Now, it more or less proceeds down a similar path, though changes as well, specifically with the character of Foltest, who doesn't seem to care to want to deal with the curse, is hiding all of it, etc., as opposed to how things were handled in books. So that's a pretty significant change. I'd say that the most significant change was with Foltest as a character, how do you expect him to be, how do you expect him to look, etc. And he's much older than you'd think he should be. I mean, I feel that Witcher 2 Foltest is the Foltest you should be looking for. Not this not this old man that we get in the Netflix series. And just keep in mind that these events are taking place quite a bit before the events of the Nilfgaardian War. And Foltest is still capable of having children he's capable of having a relationship, maybe having children with Marie Louise Lavalette. I mean, by the way, that relationship, which forms the intro of the way that's handled, forms the intro of The Witcher 2, is something that is actually mentioned by Sapkowski in the books. It's a canon event, and CD Projekt developed it from there. I mean, it seems with Triss that what they're doing is like, oh yeah, so the games did this, so we're gonna do it. Okay, I don't know if they're gonna have some conflicts with CD Projekt over that, because just keep in mind, CD Projekt has the rights to the games. Netflix has the rights to the books, but if they're copying from stuff that CD Projekt did, we'll see about that. I mean, the fight with the Striga, obviously there was influence from the intro cinematic of The Witcher 1, clear-cut influences, though the fight ends up going in a different direction than one might expect. But overall, the basic storyline is the same. Changes overall, not necessarily bad, except Foltest, but fairly solid job, I'd say, overall. And influence in not just the fight, but also the music that we get during that fight. So, fairly solid job overall, except one of the more important characters, who is the King of Temeria. Then we cut to Yennefer. Now, with Yennefer, this entire storyline obviously is something that they developed. The coming of age storyline, as I've heard that being called. And this is where Yennefer really comes into her character. She gets rid of her deformity. She stops being a hunchback. She gets transformed into what you'd expect Yennefer to look like. And she gets involved, gets tangled into the power plays within the Brotherhood of Sorcerers. So the mages on the continent, they're all very much... the mages on the continent are very much scheming bastards, and this is something that Yennefer's storyline shows. But it also shows that Yennefer herself is very selfish, very much willing to step on anyone that gets in her way in any way possible, and willing to do whatever it takes to achieve her own ends. I mean, this is the start, so to speak. And that's very much Yennefer as a character. So this is where I want to touch on the whole racial issue. For me, it doesn't matter what... outside of the frustration I feel with the fact that this is done because of the personal fucking politics of the show creator, outside of frustration I feel in regards to that, I don't care. Like, really, what race someone has. I feel genuine frustration with that. I feel genuine frustration as well. It's like, oh yeah, we don't, all these kingdoms have all these white people and black people, all this great racial diversity, which spits in the face in how, racial diversity actually works in real life. So you have something, so that's frustrating. But at the same time, in terms of actors, do I care that, Triss is not a white person, per se? Do I care that about Yennefer? Not really. I mean, I feel that is this actor capable of portraying the character in a solid way? Is this actor or actress, or are these actresses in this case, because both Triss and Yennefer are played by non-white actresses, are they capable of portraying these characters well? I feel with Yennefer, certainly yes. I was not particularly impressed by Triss, I gotta admit. I didn't feel that Triss necessarily was handled all that well, but how much of that was due to the writing, which, you're adding a character that shouldn't be part of these events, and you're just basically shoehorning them in. How much of that is due to that particular aspect or versus the actual acting? That's hard for me to say. I was less convinced by Yennefer, suffice to say, as I was by Yennefer. I feel that Yennefer's actress has done a splendid job so far at being able to convey, to really play the character she's meant to play in the way that Yennefer is supposed to be. So overall, we've got we've got one of the most important short stories of The Witcher being part of this TV series, being portrayed. Some issues here and there, but overall, whatever. The events were covered. They were covered in a fairly solid fashion, though not all the characters emerged unscathed for that. And there is a connection, mind you. These stories are not just, all random. The short stories that Geralt has been part of, they're basically a chain of events here, as opposed to their own separate things. So Blaviken happened, then he met Dandelion, then he dealt with the Striga, and obviously Yennefer's story is connected. So we're following 3 separate paths, 3 separate timelines of these 3 characters. I wonder if this is how it's gonna keep going, but that's how it's gone so far. And we now get to see, and now hopefully we get to see some of the more important stuff and some of the more important stories. Because this is all great and all for setting up events that are coming to pass, but we're 3 episodes in. And we're still dealing, I guess, with the origin stories of these characters without really diving into the main saga. I mean, how much more can you drag it out? And it's confusing. It's confusing to have 3 different characters in 3 different locations that are not interacting with one another yet, and are in different dates that we don't know of. That's confusing as all hell. That's something that's going to be a bit of an issue. And first impressions do count, because you get... You transition from, 1280 or whatever year it is with Ciri's timeline, then you go to Geralt, which is probably much earlier, to 30 or something like that, then you have Yennefer, whatever, and so you have these different timelines with no and I see that they're going to intersect with one another at some point, but understand, I'm saying this as someone who's read some of the books, a number of the short stories in particular, some of the main saga, who's played all the games, who's read a lot on the wiki beyond that, who understands the events, who understands these characters. I don't know how it would be for someone who doesn't have this kind of knowledge, how approachable this would be. But that's just my view. Anyway, moving on to episode 4. So in this, Yennefer in her scenes acts as a fancy bodyguard, a job at which she fails, and really there's nothing too interesting here. Some nice effects here and there, but really the main point seems to be story-wise to portray Yennefer as being more than just a self-serving, conniving bitch, because that's how she can come across in a lot of situations. Hell, she came across like this in the books, she came across like this in The Witcher 3, and certainly the show has also portrayed her in that light. Though, of course, there's also more to her than just that, so... that's something that the show creators wanted to showcase here. With Ciri, she goes into Brokilon Forest where she meets the Dryads. So many comments here about the Dryads. Look, I don't care that they're Amazonians. I don't care that they're all black, even though they shouldn't be, by the way. It's like people, they should... some people are commenting, it's fine for the Dryads to have racial diversity, but they don't have racial diversity. They're all black women who are basically like tribal warriors. And that's fine. Nothing wrong with that necessarily. I don't care too much about that. I do care about that the best archers in the fucking world don't actually have archers. They're all wielding spears. I mean, I think I saw a crossbow on one of them just to showcase it. Like, great job. Really wonderful job. It's like, let's make these guys, these Dryads, tribal warriors, even though they're famous archers. So we'll give them spears instead that they were preparing to throw. Now, so they made them Amazonian javelin throwers. Wonderful fucking job over there with the Dryads. Though with Ciri, what's significant here is that she is confronted with the brutality of her grandmother's reign, and the fact that the humans, especially of the Northern Kingdoms, treat non-humans like crap. And that's important for Ciri because she's also part elven. She has elven blood in her veins. So there's her grandmother, Calanthe. Yeah, she did have elven blood in her veins as well. Didn't stop her from brutalizing the elves and the peasants in general. It's a weird dynamic here with the Northerners. On one hand, they're supposed to be the good guys, so to speak, the ones you want to win this war, win Nilfgaard. On the other hand, in many respects, racism, treatment of people, overall. And just having competent, intelligent rulers. In many of those respects, the Northern Kingdoms are horrible compared to Nilfgaard. So in order to balance that, and this is where we get into the Geralt, and this is mentioned in the Geralt part, in order to balance that, they make Nilfgaard the backwater? What? Actual fuck. So, but Nilfgaard apparently starts as a backwater. I mean, I guess you want to make Emir a special snowflake who rose his people out of poverty, right? And misery, and created an empire, even though Nilfgaard was apparently a kingdom. That's not how it was, by the way. Nilfgaard was already the most powerful nation on the continent, the largest nation on the continent, the wealthiest nation on the continent. And it's basically the north that is a combination of backwater states, kingdoms, really. A combination of backwater states. And here they reverse that, flip it on its head. Anyway, Ciri is confronted with some of the brutal acts of her grandmother, and she really has to deal with that, and she's not really dealing with that. But outside of that, meeting the dryads, drinking their water, all that. These events did happen in the books, although she did actually forget everything in the books. She did lose her memory. I guess CD Projekt didn't, invent anything new, really. I mean, CD Projekt just adapted in their own way, right? The amnesia with Geralt in the games, Ciri in the books, right? So Ciri did forget. Doesn't seem like she's gonna forget here in the show. We'll see what the implications of that. Now, look, as far as I'm concerned, some people are gonna cry about, the adaptation is not faithful. To be honest, Brokilon doesn't really matter all that much, except the fact that Ciri is a world traveler. That's the thing. Like, she experiences all these cultures, all these people. She lives with them. She understands them. She understands the world. And that's a big part of her character. Her losing her memory or not, I don't know. I don't personally think that's significant. Some people would disagree very strongly with respect to it for various story reasons. Personally, I don't think it matters so much. So that's Yennefer and Ciri. Nothing exceptional happens with them. I mean, yeah, some things that are important. Brokilon. And obviously with Yennefer, it's going to change her motivation and portrays her in a different way, but nothing too exceptional, right? So we get to Geralt, who wants to kill Dandelion. Like, the way he looks here, he wants to kill Dandelion, or Jaskier, as his name is in this. Because Jaskier wants Geralt to protect him at the feast. Why? Because he's been sleeping with a lot of women that are married with very powerful men, who are also invited to this feast. Now, this feast is being held by Queen Calanth, who wants to find a husband for her daughter, Pavetta. In fact, she wants to arrange a marriage in a specific way to secure a Skelligan alliance. And I don't remember if in the short story it was with Crack-on Crate, but in here it is with Crack-on Crate. She wants to marry Pavetta to Crack-on Crate of Skellige and secure a Skelligan-Cintrian alliance, which would make Cintra one of the more powerful nations on the continent. Certainly a more formidable one. Not as formidable as Nilfgaard was in the books, though based on the fact that they've made Nilfgaard the backwater, this would probably make Cintra the most powerful nation on the continent, given this alliance. Now, at the same time, Calanth is also in a relationship with King Bran, the current king, the king of Skellige at the time. She's in a relationship with his brother, whose name I won't pronounce because East, I think it is. It's just weird for me. Anyway, with King Bran's brother, she's in a relationship, but she has rebuffed his offers of marriage. So anyway, Calanth has a plan to secure an alliance with Skellige. She can't just marry Pavetta to Crack, even though she wants to. That's the whole plan. That's the whole purpose. She needs to hold this mummers show, so to speak, this farce. And in the books, she hires Geralt to help her with it, with a particular purpose. In this, it's Jaskier / Dandelion who gets Geralt to do him a favor and protect him at this feast. Now, in both cases, Geralt really doesn't want to do this job. He just basically goes along with it very reluctantly and doesn't give a shit about it. But yeah, Geralt is not amused, as you can imagine, about this entire affair. Now, I feel personally, just to make this point, I feel personally it's a bad decision to basically have Geralt show up at the celebration because of Dandelion / the Jaskier instead of being invited there by Queen Calanth herself for a particular purpose. Because here's the thing, Calanth has a plan. She has a goal over here. She knows what's going to happen and she acts on it. She prepares for it. That's why she hires a Witcher. You take that out, you change the way a character is. Now, sure, people who watch the show may not give a fuck, but when you're doing an adaptation, what matters is the essence of a character, of a story. Here, you take you take out the fact that Calanth was prepared for this, was ready to act on it, and instead you make her a lesser character in some way. It doesn't matter too much, I'd argue, but it is something that I feel personally does matter. It's same with Tywin Lannister and the Battle of the Green Fork in the Game of Thrones, the show versus the books. Pretty significant difference. I won't get into the detail, but there is a difference between Robb Stark distracting Tywin with 2,000 men and Robb Stark distracting Tywin by sending his entire fucking infantry against Tywin's army. Significant difference, one would argue. And I do feel this has an impact on the characters in question. But anyway, Geralt is at this feast, and it goes as it does in the short story. So there's a bunch of suitors show up for Pavetta. Calanth doesn't give a fuck. She already knows who she wants Pavetta to marry. Pavetta is not particularly pleased by any of this. And then we get Dunny showing up, the Urcheon showing up. And he claims Pavetta's hand. He's basically a nobody, and he claims Pavetta's hand. But he has a trick up his sleeve. He claims Pavetta's hand based on the law of surprise, because he saved Pavetta's father, and he claimed the law of surprise based on that as payment. And he's come here to collect. Now, Calanth is not happy about this, and this is the reason she hires Geralt, because Dunny is a monster in her mind, even though he is cursed, really. And he is a very important character. So anyway, Geralt actually takes Dunny's side. Calanth's own suitor, the one she's been in a relationship with, the one who wants to marry her, also takes Dunny's side because, yes, it doesn't feel right for him to be struck down by the Cintran Royal Guard as Calanth wants to. So, whole lots of drama, and eventually, Calanth is forced to accept, based on the ancient law of surprise, based on the fact that Pavetta is already in love with Dunny. Very clever guy, Dunny. He didn't just show up at the feast to claim the law of surprise. He already has wooed the fair lass already. Some changes, though, with the curse, specifically the fact that the curse, like one of the small details in the short story, which shows how clever Calanth is that the curse stops working after a certain time. If the curse should stop working at a particular time, but and they use the bells to determine the time, right? After the 12th bell is struck. Now, in the book, in the short story, Calanth has the bells ring earlier so that the curse will stay active, so that he will show up as a monstrosity, so she can have Geralt kill this monster. That's her whole purpose. So she has the bells ring earlier for a specific purpose in order for the curse to stay active. That shows her clever. Here he's just forcefully unmasked, and a fight ensues. Pretty big one. Anyway, eventually, Calanth is forced to cede ground, and Dunny asks Geralt for what he wants, and it's like, well, same as you, I suppose. Like, Geralt really doesn't care for payment. It's like, oh yeah, I claim, he claims the law of surprise, because he doesn't think he's gonna get anything special, and then some people look at him and it's like, what the fuck have you done? It's like, don't worry, I'm sure I won't I'm sure I won't be here to pick up a sack of grain. And then Pavetta pukes, and it's like, Geralt says it best, fuck, because she's pregnant. And that's how Geralt got Ciri. Now, Big spoiler alert, and I mean spoilers for the whole fucking saga, but it's difficult to not state this because, it's been in the game trailers. It's a well-known fact of The Witcher 3, which is a very big game, and it doesn't hide this. Ciri's father is Emir. Pavetta, her mother, right? Dunny? Yeah, Dunny is Emir Maurice when he wasn't emperor. Because he got cursed, there was a whole tale. This is a reveal that happens at the end of the books. Fairly important, fairly significant reveal. But yes, that's who Emir is. This is who Emir is. This is how Geralt ultimately would end up with Ciri. And this is how the relationship began. Through this short story that is portrayed here. Not completely accurately. I didn't like some of the changes, specifically like how Geralt got to the feast, the whole thing with the 12 bells and all that. They certainly have portrayed Calanfez in a good way, in a very solid way. And I think the issue with the North being like prominent and Nilfgaard being a backwater. No, the North is the backwater. Even though they're the good guys who we want to win. Like that's how they're portraying the books. Even though they're the ones we are supposed to root for, they're the racist bigots that slaughter non-humans, whereas Nilfgaard treats them reasonably well, specifically the elves. They treat their people in general like crap, and they're underdeveloped, and they are poorer than Nilfgaard. And indeed, that's one of the big aspects. Whereas Nilfgaard is a combination of Holy Roman Empire, and Nazi Germany, I'd say. But no, they've changed that aspect about Nilfgaard. They've changed the North. It is a tricky balancing act to handle the situation with the North, especially considering what they are, what they've done, what they represent, the fact that they're effectively in every way that matters, they're worse than Nilfgaard, and yet we're supposed to feel for the North and we're supposed to care about the North. So I guess the show creators decided we need to give something to the North or no one's gonna care about them. Yeah, no one's gonna care about the bigots who treat their people like shit, who slaughter non-humans, versus the mighty, wealthy, powerful empire. Oh, I have an idea. Let's make the empire poor and a backwater and insignificant. And based on, just some small details I've seen in future episodes, haven't really watched beyond this point, just, got a glimpse, I'd say, a bit of future episodes. It's like, they're also a bit communist? I don't know, fascist, whatever, something along those lines. So, yeah, we'll see how they handle that. I certainly hope they don't make Nilfgaard pure evil, because they're not pure evil. They do a lot of shit, but they're not simply pure evil. But we'll see how they handle that balancing act, or how poorly they handle that balancing act, because so far I'm not impressed by it. But anyway, these are the first 4 episodes of The Witcher of Netflix. My view on all of it is overall, it's a fairly solid adaptation, though it does have issues here and there. I certainly like the first episode quite a bit. The with the Lesser Evil short story. I do think that Yennefer's storyline, especially her training, was certainly interesting. I don't particularly care so far about Ciri. I did think the Cintra aspect about it has been interesting, but beyond that, after Ciri leaves Cintra, not too interesting. We'll see how they develop it from there. But so far, fairly solid adaptation, reasonably well done. Some issues here and there, but is it horrible? No. Not yet. I might change my opinion after the next 4 episodes. Let's put it like that. I might change that. I am not enamored with what they've done with Nilfgaard. I am not thrilled at all about that. I don't think they've handled Triss in any way, shape, or form in a good way. I think Yennefer is perfectly fine. I think the actors are pretty good for the most part. Only major issue I have with Triss, she just doesn't fit the bill. I'm sorry. I don't. It may be the writing, might be the actress, might be the direction of the character, might be how they shoehorned Triss in a story she has no business being part of. Specifically, the fact that we've seen Triss only in like the Striga storyline, which she was not part of, and it's like, oh yeah, she's the mage advisor at Foltest. No, Kira Metz is the mage advisor at Foltest, not fucking Triss Marigold. But I guess they eliminated Kira Metz. So that's all there is to say so far. Stay tuned for more. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications.